Hello, and welcome to ARTFul Insights. My name is Susan Shifrin. I'm the director of ARTZ Philadelphia, and together, you and I are going to spend about 30 to 40 minutes looking at a few pieces of art together. This video is produced in partnership between Dementia Society of America and ARTZ Philadelphia. Each month, we offer a program online, a live program with a small group of people joining together to talk about works of art from museums and cultural centers across the country, a different museum or center each month. And then in addition to that live program, we then produce a video like this. We will be looking at the same works of art that we did in the live group, but with the video, first of all, it's 30 to 40 minutes in length. You can watch it any time of day or night that suits you. And it's an opportunity to have a more intimate, a more self-driven conversation about these works of art. I will ask a few questions to get us started, give you a few things to think about. I will share with you some of the observations and thoughts that folks from the live program might have brought up that I think might be interesting for you to consider. But really, this video each month is about you. It's about what you see in these works of art, how you respond to them, and just having the opportunity to look at them and think about them at your own pace. If you're watching this video with someone, then by all means, feel free to pause the video from time to time if you'd like, so that you can have your own conversation. If you're watching on your own, then I'm delighted, and it'll be a conversation between the two of us. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to the museum or cultural center that we will be visiting this month. Welcome to ARTFul Insights. So today, we will be visiting together the Autry Museum of the American West, located in Los Angeles, California. First, I want to say a big thank you to our colleagues at the Autry Museum for allowing us to come through their virtual doors to provide this program to you, and for collaborating with us and joining with us to make this ARTFul Insights program possible. Before we begin the program proper, which is to look at art together and have a conversation together about it, I'd like to share a few details with you about the Autry Museum so you have a sense of where we're visiting and what we could see if we were there in person. I'll be right back with those details. So here we are at the entrance to the Autry Museum of the American West. As I've said, the museum is located in Los Angeles, California, and the museum's mission is to tell the diverse stories of the American West and to connect the past with the present to inspire a shared future. Through the Autry's collections, the museum strives to enrich understanding of the historical and contemporary American West and the diversity of indigenous cultures across the Americas. Now let's take a quick look at the collections page on the Autry Museum's website so that we can learn a little bit more about the range of collections they hold. So here we see the collections page from the Autry Museum's website. The collections of the Autry Museum are quite substantial, with more than 600,000 pieces that include visual art and objects of material culture that bring to life the following themes: California history, Native America, environment and Western resources, ranching and cowboys, archaeology and anthropology, and popular culture. As you can see, it's a very large permanent collection and enormous depth and breadth. Today, we are going to be spending time with each other looking at one piece from the Autry's permanent collection, and let's go ahead and do that now. So here we are looking at, for the first time, at the painting that we're going to be spending our time together discussing. Take a look for the next few minutes. Take a look at the painting. Ask yourself, where does my eye look first as I'm sitting in front of this painting? What do I notice about it? Once you've had a chance to look at some of the details, we'll come back together and start our conversation. So I asked you to consider the question of what you see, where your eye goes first in this painting. And I wonder what you came up with in terms of an answer. This is, we could say this is a combination of a landscape painting, a painting of a group of figures on horseback. What did your eye go first to the components of the landscape, or did it go first to the figures within the landscape? So let's take a look, a little more of a detailed look at those figures and see what we see. So the first thing is, before we get too close up, I'd like to ask you to notice two things that we often look at when we're looking at paintings, because the artists often tell us something by how these are painted. First, let's look at the hands of the figures, and then we'll look at the eyes of each of the faces that we see. So, starting from, I guess, right to left, which is a little bit backwards, but oh well. We see that his hand is outstretched, right? Right here. And we'll talk a little bit later about what that outstretched hand might signify. But as we move on, let's look at this figure, this standing figure. So the first figure we looked at the rightmost part of the grouping is crouching, right? The figure next to him is standing. We see what? That one of his hands seems to be holding on to whatever this implement might be. Do you have a sense of what that might be? We don't see his other hand so much. It seems to be behind this shield of some sort, right? Moving to his left, we see another person with hand not exactly outstretched, but
poised in the air, right? We see him gesturing with his hand. What does it look like that gesture might mean? Is he in the midst of saying something? Is he considering something? What does that hand gesture? Can you make that gesture? Sometimes when we emulate the gestures or expressions that we see in paintings, it actually helps us to get an embodied sense of what we're looking at. So if we hold our hand this way, what does that make you feel? How can you match your behavior with holding your hand up that way? What do you think? So we've looked at the first three figures. Now let's look at the fourth figure, who seems to be kneeling, right? So there is his left hand. Can you get a sense from looking at it what that hand might be doing? Does it look like he's touching something with that hand, or that it's just sort of floating above what he might otherwise have been touching? This hand is grasping something. It looks like, do you think that it's a quiver of arrows? It's a little hard to tell, but these look a bit like the ends of arrows, the feathered ends of arrows, don't they? Now we come to a figure on horseback, right? One of the hands seems to be holding the horse's reins, right? The other hand, this one, the right hand, seems almost paused in mid gesture, as though perhaps this person is saying something and that hand is motioning as though to accentuate what he's saying, perhaps. Does it look to you like this person is speaking? And then finally, we have this person. Where is his hands? Do you see them anywhere? We see feet, but I'm not sure that we see hands, do we? Which is interesting. Perhaps we need to kind of surmise what his hands might be doing. So what I'd like to do now is see if we can get a little more detail when it comes to looking at their eyes. So what do you see here? How would you describe what you see in the eye? Any particular emotion, any particular sense of what this person might be looking at or saying? His lips also seem to be a bit pursed, as though, or partially opened, as though he might be actually saying something. And then, of course, we have this figure, again, with that very eloquent hand gesturing. Then we have this kneeling figure. So there's the face. How would you describe his face? How would you describe his eyes? Is it a peaceful face? Is it a worried face? Is it a perhaps spiritually engaged face? What do you think? How would you describe his face? It seems that there might be several faces in this group of figures that really require us to do some interpretation of what these figures are thinking or experiencing. And then there are another three figures whose faces are kind of, I don't know, is the word inscrutable? we have a hard time figuring out what they might be thinking. At least that's, I think, how I see it, but I'm wondering how you see it. That would be a very interesting conversation. What I want to invite you to do now is to pause, look at the painting some more with this, with having absorbed these new sources of information. Now that you've had a chance to join with me in looking at some of the details, I want you to take a few minutes. If you're sitting watching this video with someone else, you could have a conversation about what we've already talked about and some of the questions that it's raised. See what you come up with, and then we'll come back together again. We'll talk a little bit about what you discovered, and then we'll talk about some more ways of approaching this painting. So welcome back. I hope you had plenty of time to think and absorb some of the things that we talked about. I like in these videos sometimes to share with you some of the conversations we've had in the live online group discussions. Several of our participants in our online group discussion were very certain that this was a painting depicting American Indians or Native Americans, also known as indigenous people of America. Other comments were, this is very realistic. So three-dimensional, there's movement. It's breathtaking, it's beautiful. And then one of our participants said, these Native Americans are on top of some wonderfully rocky formation in the middle of what appears to be a very active river with waterfalls, and it's foamy. It's just an amazing picture. Someone else said, yes, it looks like there are rapids there. It could be dangerous. So these are things we have not talked about yet. The rock formation, the very active water rapids, the froth of the rapids, and perhaps a waterfall. So the next question would be, if you agree with our other participants in talking about this painting, that some of the most prominent features of this painting that you would want to describe to someone who hasn't seen it or can't see it: rock formations, rapids, waterfall, Native Americans, American Indians. We actually had mentioned before that at least two of the figures that we see in the painting are on horseback, the rest are not. We also see, perhaps, do we think that that's the nose of a third horse, and might there be additional riders as part of this group? That's something that's suggested, but not answered for sure. So if those are the components that are most powerful, the next question might be, what associations or thoughts does the painting evoke in us? What are we prompted to think about as we're looking at this? We talked a little bit about what our investigation of hands and eyes might tell us. So we notice this outstretched hand. Now that we have noticed as well these very, very frothy, active rapids, what do you think this hand is gesturing towards? Some of our participants in the live group thought that perhaps this figure is holding out his hand to feel the spray, the cool spray of the water, just to sense that natural feeling of it. Is there something else you think he might be doing in gesturing that way? There's so many different ways we could interpret this. I'd love to know what you think. And then this figure, who seems to be kneeling, and as we said, is he touching something? He's perhaps looking in this direction, maybe towards us, who knows? Is he touching the rock, do you think? Or holding his hand over a crevice in the rocks? One of our participants suggested that if we look at his face, it looks like he's deep in thought, perhaps, and maybe there's a spiritual ritual of some kind going on here. And so his hand may be touching the rock as part of that ritual. I want to share a few more comments with you that were made by our participants in the live online discussion we had. One of them noted that she felt that the Indians, the Native Americans in this painting, were painted very respectfully, painted heroically, very much in touch with nature. And I wonder, do you feel the same way? Do you feel a sense that they are painted not stereotypically, as might often be the case? And our participants said that in judging this painting to depict the Native Americans respectfully, she thinks that that's not so often the attitude in the West. So it would be interesting to know if it's a Western artist who painted this and what period it was painted in. And I can tell you it was painted in 2003, so quite recently. But again, the words she used, heroic, in touch with nature. Others complimented what she had observed and said, when I look at these gentlemen, they have a peaceful appearance. They're looking at the water, maybe fishing or something of that nature, something that they're scouting. What do you think about the idea that maybe this advanced party is scouting and those on horseback are following behind? What do you think of that idea of scouting? This all led us in our online conversation to ask the question, what are they doing here on this incredibly high, rocky outcropping overlooking this aggressive, rapid fury of water? One of our participants said that she was a little skeptical of the realism of this scene. She said that, let's see if I can find what she said. Here's what she said. It looks like the Native Americans were dressed to pose for this picture. there's something about it that to her is not reality. The more I look at it, the more I wonder, were they posed? Their dress seems authentic, but why are you out on this jib with a waterfall? What's the purpose of you being out there? You can't cross it, so why are you there if it's not a photo op? Okay, so maybe not a photo op, but a painting op. How do you have some on horses, she says. What's on the other side of this waterfall? The more I look at it, I have no answers. And this comment from one of our participants started the others thinking about, that question. Well, what are they doing here? So I'm curious what you think they're doing here. What would you say? Again, you can rewind to revisit our discussion about hands and eyes and faces. Can you tell from these I'll say it again, very eloquent hands that essentially guide us right across this rock from person to person to person, down, up again to person, and then to the final person? What do you think they're doing here? So as I mentioned, one of our participants suggested that perhaps, they were out scouting. Are they looking at the water, maybe fishing or something of that nature, something that they're scouting? After the conversation about, this is a little troubling, they seem posed somehow, as if by the artist. This same person who had said, well, maybe they're fishing or maybe they're scouting for something, said, I think they're just exploring. It's a depiction of wonderfully beautiful things in our country. There are parts of our country that look like this that we don't get to see. This wonderful water coming down this massive river, these huge boulders that they have gone out on to just look and appreciate the water that's coming down. It's beauty. What about the idea that they might be exploring, or they might be looking, as our participant said, at the sheer beauty of the scene, the massiveness, the monumental nature that they see around them? What do you think of that idea? This led us to have a conversation about places that we've been in our lives where we felt similarly awestruck by nature around us. And so I want to ask you, have you ever stood in front of a raging torrent of water or in front of a very, very high waterfall whose cascades just take your breath away? Our participants told us, one of them said that she had rafted down the Colorado River with the rapids, and that was almost as scary as she imagines standing and looking over these rapids might be for these men. Do they look scared to you? That's a whole other question, isn't it? And then our participant, our friend who said that she believed that these men are simply out exploring or they're, looking for fish. She said that she and her husband, who was also in the conversation, had the great opportunity to stand in front of the Grand Teton, a 14,000-foot mountain. And it takes your breath away, and it makes you realize how small we are and how beautiful the earth is. What do you think about that interpretation? I do want to share with you before we say goodbye that the artist of this painting is in fact from Illinois, so he's not from the West. His name is Howard Turpning. He has spent the latter part of his career, however, focusing on the landscapes and figures associated with the American West. So this is his kind of idiomatic visual language. But he originated from the Midwest, not the West Coast, not California, not Nevada, not Santa Fe, New Mexico. I'm wondering what title you would be inclined to give this painting. If you've watched some of our other videos or come to any of the online live programs we've done, you'll know that we often invite each other to give a title for the painting we're looking at or the work of art we're looking at, because it's a way of kind of tying up all the strings of our conversation. And though we didn't get a chance because we ran out of time in our conversation online, where we were ending up just before we said goodbye was with this idea of the grandeur of nature, the power of nature, how breathtaking it is, how small human scale is compared to the scale of boulders and waterfalls and the rapids of rivers. Interestingly enough, Howard Turpning's title for his painting, which is, by the way, oil on canvas, is "The force of nature humbles all men." The force of nature humbles all men. So here I am. I want to just wrap things up and thank you so much for joining me today to visit the Autry Museum of the American West and to spend time looking at that remarkable painting by Howard Turpning. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I know we got into the weeds a bit with looking at hands and eyes and faces, but I also hope that you got the sense that it doesn't need to be intimidating to look at art and to figure out where your eye is drawn, what stories you're seeing embodied in what you're looking at, and also the stories you have to tell that are brought to mind by what you're looking at. Thank you so much for joining me today for ARTFul Insights. I hope you'll be back to see another video with us and to join us perhaps online for one of our online conversations. In the meantime, I'm Susan Shifrin, the director of ARTZ Philadelphia, and on behalf of ARTZ Philadelphia, the Autry Museum in Los Angeles, California, and the Dementia Society of America, thank you for joining us for ARTFul Insights. Take care.